Where would we be today without Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, or DHCP? We'd be in a lot of trouble having to go out there and manually configure our IPv4 devices. Well, let's jump into our Chapter 19 lab because we are going to be challenged with none other than DHCP. Notice we're going to be configuring R1 as a DHCP server, and we'll be configuring R2 as a DHCP relay, and sure enough, we'll be configuring R3 as a DHCP client. And thinking about this, we know that we're going to need a relay because this client will be sending its messages that it needs a DHCP address, and those wouldn't make it to the DHCP server way over here on R1 without this router forwarding those messages to the DHCP server. So this scenario makes great sense, and let's get in and get started. So we will begin. I don't think there's any reason to do this out of order. Let's begin right on the R1 device, and we are going to go ahead and configure a DHCP server. Now, the first thing that they mentioned to us is the first thing we would want to do, and that is any DHCP exclusions. So I think the command structure would be IP DHCP, and then let me just do context sensitive help. And look at this, great news. We have the IP DHCP excluded address command, and notice this takes a low address and a high IP address to define the range. If you wanted to exclude a single address, of course, you could just specify that address for the low and the high IP addresses in that range. But here they want us to exclude from 10.23.23.1 to the high IP address, which is 10.23.23.5. Obviously, this is one of those configurations where you really want to be taking a moment to ensure you've typed in the IP addresses correctly. Wouldn't it be a nightmare to lose points in a CCNA simulation based on just entering in the wrong IP address in one of those two fields? So now that we have done our exclusions, we're going to create a DHCP pool named CCNA Lab. This pool is going to have all the information that this router will need to give out DHCP addresses and associated settings. So we're going to say IP DHCP pool, and context sensitive help tells us that we then give the name, which in our case is CCNA Lab. We are now in DHCP pool configuration mode, if you will, and notice that we are going to be handing out network addresses for the 10.23.23 network. So what options are available for us here? Sure enough, there is a command for network, and that's exactly how we specify the addresses that we'll be leasing out. So I say network and then the network number in dotted decimal notation. That's going to be 10.23.23.0, and the network mask 255.255.255.0. And anything else there? Nope, just a carriage return. So there we go. We specify the network, the IP addresses that we will be leasing out. Now, it is very typical to assign like DNS servers and other settings to your clients. And of course, one of them that's so critical is what is their default gateway going to be. Notice that we set that up in our pool with the default router command. So the default router that we will give out as part of this pool will be 10.23.23.2. So there is the configuration of our pool and the exclusion of some IP addresses from that pool. Notice that one of the IP addresses that we excluded is, sure enough, the address of our default gateway. Yeah, we wouldn't have wanted to give that out via DHCP and cause a IP conflict. So there we have it. I can end this configuration. There's not really much for us to verify at this point, especially if you were being very, very careful to double check all your entries against the scenario. I really wouldn't bother with much verification here at all. All right, so we've saved our config with our WR, and now we are going to slide over to configure the R2 device as a DHCP relay. Now remember, we need to be in the correct interface, and that would be gig 0/1, so that we hear the DHCP requests coming in from R3. So making sure you configure this feature in the correct place in the network is obviously going to be very important. So it's gig 0/1 on the R2 device. And how do we configure this feature? Well, it's IP helper address, and we are going to configure a destination IP address here that this device will send these DHCP requests to. And what is that address? Well, they made it easy for us. They gave it to us, so we don't have to go and look for it. It's the IP address on our R1 device, which is 10.12.12.1. So there is our DHCP relay configuration, and we are going to end, and we are going to save. Once again, just confirm that you have entered in the IP address correctly there. All right, well, next up, what we are going to do is go to R3, and we are going to configure R3's gig 0/0 interface to be a DHCP client. So I'm going to say configure terminal, and let's do show IP interface brief, by the way. We're going to make sure that there is no configuration on this interface. Great. And then I will say interface gig 0/0 IP address. Let's get it from DHCP. So IP address DHCP. We're going to end and save, and look at this. You talk about immediate verification gratification. We get a syslog message that says the gig 0/0 interface just assigned DHCP address 10.23.23.6. Look at that. It's the first available address beyond our exclusion range, and the mask is correct, and the host name, of course, that we have is R3, and we should also have our default gateway. If I do a show IP route, we should see that we have a default gateway set up. Look at that. So that setting worked from DHCP as well. I love it. Something else that occurred, notice, right when we got our dynamic IP address on this router, sure enough, that enabled OSPF to become adjacent, and so we have our OSPF routes populating the routing table of R3. Awesome stuff. I'm going to save, and we're done. Yeah, notice you could over-verify in a scenario like this. You could go over to R1 and start doing fancy stuff like show IP DHCP binding. You could look at the binding database and you could say, oh, wow, look at this. We do have a device bound to this address out there. There's the MAC address and IP address for our DHCP lease. We could look at IP DHCP pool information. That would be show IP DHCP pool. And you can see, this is all great. And these would be the types of verifications you would do when you are initially studying DHCP in a Cisco environment. But remember, our focus in these review labs is going to be that you're operating in the exam and you have had to complete these tasks as part of a simulation. So I wouldn't be going and doing those additional verifications. Notice we were careful with the R1 and R2 configs, and then sure enough, right away on R3, we ended up getting all the verification that we needed really from an automatic syslog message. Yeah, so let's not in our exam environment over-verify. Well, let's check our results. I'm being awfully confident here about that, the fact that we did everything correct. And sure enough, my confidence was rewarded. We did do everything correct in this chapter review lab. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'll be back with plenty more chapter reviews for you from our text on utilizing Packet Tracer for hands-on mastery in the CCNA exam.